Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Writer's Block. Today, we're going to be talking about dialogue, and specifically dialogue based around style, which I will explain in a minute. I'm Jonah, and one of my favorite lines of dialogue is from Calvin and Hobbes. It's when Calvin says, "My ethicator machine must have had a built-in moral compromise spectral release phantasmatron." Anyway, we also do have a new member with us today. He's also from our writing group, and his name is Steve. Hello, Steve.
Hello.
Everyone wave hello to Steve.
Hello, Steve.
Hey, Steve.
So I'm Steve. I write young adult fantasy and struggle with dialogue all the time, so I'm excited about today's discussion.
What's
Do you
your
have a favorite line of dialogue?
My favorite line of dialogue. Let me process that a little bit more, and then
come back around.
Yeah, he's new. He's new. We'll get back to him.
Yeah. I can go next. Unless that happens. My apologies, internet. Anyway, my name's Mason. As you may know if you've been watching any of these videos, or if you just find me entirely forgettable, maybe you don't, and that's okay. I like dialogue. I'm probably not as conscious of it, not as dialed in as I would like to be. And so for that reason, I am also excited for today, though I do enjoy writing it. Favorite line is hard to choose. The short story for dialogue that was held over my head by creative writing professors that I'm actually pretty grateful for looking back is Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, just because I think there's some solid dialogue in there for sure. That being said, I do find that there is some witty banter in The Owl House, which is a recently released TV show from Disney. Excellent, been enjoying it thoroughly, highly recommend. Animated. By the people that made Gravity Falls, for those of you that are fans. Look at me, giving away free plugs to the mouse. Anyways, who's next?
All right, I'm Cameron. My favorite line of dialogue, or at least the one that springs first to mind, is, "I love you, I know." That one is just perfect because, no, shut up, I'm right.
I think it's great. I love this.
It says so much about the characters without having to go into, oh, well, he's cocky and she is the one putting in the emotional effort in this relationship. It's all just right there. It's perfect.
Speaking of romance, I'm Erica, and my favorite line comes from this recent season of The Crown. I led an episode on love triangles 2 weeks ago, and I think the most important love triangle of the 20th century was Prince Charles, his first wife Diana, and his second wife Camilla. And there's a scene where they depict Diana and Camilla going out to eat together, and they're fighting over who gets to pay the bill at the end. And Diana wants to, presumably on the grounds that she's richer. Camilla wants to, on the grounds that she's older. And Camilla's response to Diana suggesting they share the bill is, "Okay, I like sharing."
Old as ice.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Now I'm torn on the shows, but I come from a theater background. So for me, the first favorite line came to mind is a play that I love called Light Sensitive, and in it, one of the characters gives a speech about monologue about how we don't really love people for who they are. We love people for who we think they are. And it's that thinking is coming from these special moments where we kind of take a snapshot in our mind of our moment. And when we see that person, we don't really see them. We see that snapshot, that memory of who they were in that moment when we realized we fell in love with them. And so that's just always stuck with me. It's a really beautiful moment from that play.
And what's your name?
Oh, well, my name. No, my name is...
They know his name. They know his name.
How dare you?
Yeah.
Okay, I got my favorite line.
Oh, yes, share with the class.
You see, Harry, you say things like that and you make it impossible for me to hate you. And I hate you, Harry. I really, really hate you.
It's a great line.
It's a classic.
I guess I'm betraying my ignorance here. What's that from?
Harry Met Sally.
Yes. I was told
Classic.
I wasn't allowed to watch that movie until I was married. Anyway, welcome everyone. After our very efficient, concise intro that we are famous for, we are going to be talking about dialogue. And specifically, we are going to be talking about dialogue in terms of style, because there are any number of lectures and discussions and podcasts that you can go to learn about the mechanics of writing dialogue, where you hear discussions by famous authors like Stephen King and such. He wrote his book on writing, talks about the mechanics of dialogue for chapters on end. And you learn about where to put dialogue tags and where to put the punctuation, and all of that is something that is endlessly replicated. You can learn how to make good mechanical dialogue anywhere, and even just from honing your craft, you can learn to write dialogue just from writing more and more and listening to how people talk more and more. But the thing that we're going to be discussing is dialogue and style, where you think about each author's very unique and very specific ways that they approach the dialogue of their characters, because that's one of the hallmarks of writing, is that everyone will approach the same thing differently. And for example, if you think about dialogue by some of your favorite authors or some of your favorite directors, I know that one of my favorite styles of dialogue is Joss Whedon, specifically in the first Avengers movie, because it's that very snappy, very sophisticated kind of humor. And you hear Iron Man say the word Shakespeare in the park in response to seeing Thor in the middle of a forest, and you go, yep, that's classic Joss Whedon. And so I am just going to open this up to the rest of the class now, as I like calling you, because clearly I'm the best teacher here. But
Obviously.
I asked you guys to think about this beforehand, but what do you think are kind of the quote unquote hallmarks, or just the kinds of things you've learned about your own approach to dialogue and your own style of dialogue?
So I recently finished I think it was my 12th book earlier this year. At the time I wrote that, I was volunteering in a history center where the only reading material I had access to was an 800-page history book and my little spiral-bound historic sides guide. And so all I could read all day, every day was quotes from people in the 1830s talking the way people in the 1830s talked. And the result of that is, when I had a boring shift, I was writing a book about a fantasy world that's kind of an 1830s Americana setting, and I was consciously modeling some of the dialogue off phrases in those books. Like there's a phrase where some historical figure, I don't remember who anymore, use the phrase "I have a mind to" instead of "I want to" or "I'm going to," and "I'm going to" sounds very modern to me. So I have two places in that book that grew out of that time where somebody says, "I have a mind to do this." Or there's a quote from something I read at the time where somebody said he was well enough off when his mother asked him how he was doing. And so I have a girl being embarrassed when she's in a lot of pain, and somebody asks her how she's feeling, and she says, "I'm well enough off." And I think I absorbed a lot of that subconsciously during that time, but I was very consciously borrowing speech patterns to be able to model it off a very similar world to what I was writing.
One of the things that I've noticed for myself lately, I'm actually going back right now and re-editing a book, the very first book that I ever finished writing 4 or 5 years ago now. And in going back,
and what a book it is.
Thank you, appreciate that.
It's beautiful.
As I'm looking at the dialogue in the novel, it needs a little help. I have two contradictory impulses when it comes to writing dialogue, where on the one hand, I want to make it sound like real things that people say. So I want to insert a certain amount of vocal hesitancy, a few ums and ahs and stutters, that sort of stuff. While a little bit of it can go a long way, it can get old really fast if you overdo it, and I definitely overdid it. And at the same time, I was throwing in my 50-cent words everywhere that I love so much. And it didn't sound like, not only did it not sound like real people, but it all sounded like the same fake's person. So I needed to like focus my 50-cent words on the one character who is older and urbane and intelligent, And the girl who's from the
conceiving.
backwater city, I had to like pull a lot of that crap out and really pare down her lines into simpler, more straightforward language, and really think, who is this character? Where are they coming from? And how are they going to speak?
Absolutely. One of the characters in my series that I have self-published and will hopefully continue to self-publish, not hopefully, I will. One character in particular uses the word y'all. And it's fascinating to me how many people have that particular conversation with me. They will talk to me specifically about like, does everyone say this? Does this character only say this? They'll like go through. I have consistently had conversations just about the word y'all, right? Which I think speaks to what Cameron's saying. The vernacular that you select for your different characters has a direct impact on the impression. And people pick up on the smallest of words if they're distinctive, right? And if they come from a particular environment that people are familiar with. Another thing that I do want to say just really quick is that I think one of the most important things about dialogue is what goes unsaid. And I think that my dialogue, when it's at its best, is at its best because people aren't saying what they really mean, or are trying to conceal or trying to be different. I really, really, really believe, I've been told by a lot of people that like writers are self-isolationists who don't want to interact with people. A lot of writers have told me that. A lot of people that don't write have told me that. And I think that that can be true, but for me, writing is a thing of reaching to people. It's another way to reach out to people, right? And I think that the more that you get to know people, the more that you will find that people rarely say what they actually genuinely mean, and will more frequently say other things in order to support what they want other people to think of them, or to support a specific aim or goal or thing like that. So I think oftentimes a really important thing to take into account is what should your character really believe but not say, because they're human or an alien or whatever. I think the principle applies to more than humanity if we're applying verisimilitude to your particular work of literature. Sorry, I kind of went off for a second there. My apologies.
No, I wanted to piggyback on that because a kind of eye-opening piece of writing advice that I heard once is that the characters, some of the best dialogue is when characters are talking past each other, and it happens more in real life than we are conscious of, because as a writer you want to think about these two people have different goals in the conversation, or even just different things that they're interested in, and so like they'll be coming at that conversation from totally different places and probably not even directly addressing what the other is saying. It doesn't always have to be because they're trying to conceal something, but just that their own motivations are not going to be on the same page as separate individuals. And those conversations just feel charged in this way, I think, when you're the reader, because then you're the third person seeing both and seeing how they're missing each other. And that adds like just a lot of depth and interest to whatever conversation is happening. One time a teacher said this to me, it blew my mind. He said, nobody should ever answer a question in a line of dialogue. Like a question should be asked, but then the other character should ask another question back instead of answering it. And like, it's just like a simple trick, but it kind of is amazing. Like it works amazingly if you just never have anybody answer anybody else in the conversation.
Yeah, the avoidance of like directly addressing says a lot about the character, just as much as a character's direct address might, right? And I think that anyone that's had an uncomfortable conversation with Uncle Lou during Thanksgiving about your particular political candidate will know that sometimes people don't care what you're saying. They just know what they know, and they're just going to keep saying it in different ways until either one of them catches with you by some miracle from on high, or you give up and get tired, right? And I think that that's the way that it is in a lot of really important and emotionally charged conversations, which if your writing it has drama in it and has interpersonal drama, it will probably have those charged conversations.
Well, it's also going to create more conflict, right? Because if people are talking past each other or not answering questions, then, you know, it's building up to something of, you know, what is that answer, and putting that question in the mind of the reader. As I mentioned earlier, since I come from a theater background, that actually did affect the way I write, because the first things I wrote were plays, because I was taking a playwriting class. So I don't always do this, but my sort of natural tendency is for dialogue, I just write the dialogue. There's no descriptions, there's nothing, there's no dialogue tags. I mean, maybe a little dialogue tag here or there, but it's not in a scene. It's just basically two talking heads, because that's similar to what you write for a play. I mean, you end up, you know, also putting in descriptions for the blocking. But that is where a lot of my scenes will start, just the conversation between the two people, what's happening, and then everything else that's happening too ends up getting built around that. There's some good things about that, because it makes me really focus on just the dialogue itself, which is nice. But I'm not going to recommend that as something that people should do all the time, because it is definitely time consuming to then go back and say, okay, what is happening during this? I think it's led to some good scenes that I've written, but they're not always as efficiently written as they could be. It's definitely faster. I have found personally to be writing the descriptions and the dialogue at the same time. But it has been interesting for me to notice that tendency, because of my background of how I will still, even to this day, you know, almost 20 years later, still sometimes be writing, you know, dialogue and scenes just as the dialogue.
Oh, theater backgrounds, they're so helpful. But for me, at least, like, I obviously come from a very different academic background in terms of the styles that I try to write, and because I'm trying to write, like, you know, Jane Austen or Tolstoy or something, who have either blocks of dialogue 2 pages long, or a line of dialogue and then a paragraph of explanation as to what the motivation of the inner workings of the mind of the character is about. But the biggest thing for me in thinking about my style of dialogue was actually realizing, like, the way that I put it down on the page. Because, fun fact about me, I am on the autistic spectrum. I am high functioning, but it is still there. And one of the ways that affects my creative process is that I will actually just hear every line of prose that I write as it's coming out onto the page. And the advantage of that, obviously, is that my dialogue, when I write it, sounds like an actual conversation, because it is an actual conversation going on in my head. But the problem with that is, because I'm hearing all of it in my voice in my head, it is very incredibly difficult for me to get my characters to sound different. Like, a lot of my early writing, I think even when I was in Brandon's class, there was always someone saying, these two characters sounded exactly alike. And they all did. They were all very funny. They were all very eloquent. And they all sounded exactly like Jonah Byers, and I did not want that to happen. So one of the things that I've actually had to examine about my own style and about my own approach to dialogue is that I have to consciously go, okay, who is this character? Are they the one who gets to use the word decidedly every other sentence? Because that's one of my favorite words. And then I really have to basically reverse engineer their dialogue based on who their character is, because otherwise their character and their dialogue is completely disconnected, because they'll be whoever I've made them, but they'll sound exactly like me. I mean, I imagine that no one else has exactly that problem.
I know. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting you said that, like, you know, Joss Whedon is one of your favorites, because I think that's one of the things that gets leveled at him a lot, is that, you know, you get this kind of sameness sounding to everybody.
Like Aaron Sorkin, too.
Yeah. How much do y'all, I want to use y'all now, how much y'all become actors when you're writing a scene? Are you really trying to, like, inhabit, you know, I mean, yeah, and Jeff, maybe you as an actor can kind of say, like, is that really what you're doing? Like, you're trying to act out each one to get you into that zone?
Sometimes I feel like I sometimes have a strange relationship with dialogue, that when a scene is coming, it's just like, oh no, this is what they say. Like, it's just like, no, that's just, that's how it is. Like, that's who they are. That's how they say it. But I have found that there are moments where characters can definitely sound the same. The first book I was writing had like 6, 7 guys all around the same age, you know, they're, you know, and then that's tricky, right? To then say, okay, like, how are these various characters different? So I do think taking some time to really kind of inhabit them and say, who are they? How should it be different? It's an important thing. And I think it's something, you know, we all need to watch for as writers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jeff, it's interesting that both of us have backgrounds in theater. I mean, I didn't do anything with theater academically during my time in college, but like I did a lot of it in high school. And I'm not sure I would be able to talk about inhabiting my characters, because I don't know, there's just something about it that doesn't make me feel like I am like becoming them as I'm writing their lines. It just kind of happens. Like, I don't know if that's because I'm on the spectrum or not, but I am a full-on discovery writer. And so for me, I'm not so much consciously inhabiting them as just kind of letting it all come out of my brain. And like, is anyone else here more outliney? Can anyone else give some insight into that? I'm sure Brandon could if he were here, but
Not with dialogue. I'm
Definitely outlining.
Discoveries as characters. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Erica, you said that you're outlining, so I'll make this brief because we should get to you for sure. Actually, you just go ahead and go. You spoke before I did. I'll talk after you.
that was brief. Very good.
Awesome.
I'm
I do
definitely
have thoughts.
outliney, but usually, I think being an outliner predominantly it affects me when it comes to plot, less to characters. And characters, people talk about them taking on their life of their own. I've never had many full-on moments like that where I feel like the characters telling me what to do. I also don't feel, Jonah, like I'm inhabiting my characters, but I think the more you work with it, whether that's as an outliner, the longer you spend planning it and working through drafts, or as a discovery writer, you're going back through revisions, you're going to learn who your character is, and you're going to know what they would and wouldn't say. You'll be able to know how to best express them. Like, I'm working on a revision of a book I wrote previously with this group with a really manipulative character. And something I did very consciously is I use a lot of adverbs in our dialogue tags because I want them to know when she's saying something soft, or when she's saying something snarkily, or when she's being somewhat sincere about something, because she's doing that very calculated and it's to an effect. So the more time you spend with your characters, the more you're going to know how to communicate with them.
All right. Well, does anyone? Oh, yes, Mason.
Yeah, sorry. Just really quick, the characters that I'm currently writing with, I have been writing with for a very long time, right? The first book that I self-published, I revised multiple times and effectively worked on for 5 to 6 years, writing and rewriting. And now I'm currently writing and rewriting the sequel, right? So at this point, I've spent somewhere around a decade just with the same cast, basically. And I will say that I think it's kind of reached that point a little bit for me. I know who the different characters are. I know where they're coming from. I know why they're doing the things that they're doing. And so when I do write the book, I think that it kind of has on some level reached that point of like getting to inhabit the characters a little bit, which I really enjoy a lot. And I think also there was a point early on in all of this, years and years and years ago, where I realized, because I also discovery write like Jonah does, but my discovery writing is very character focused. Basically, I just want to know my characters really, really, really well, so I know what they would do in any situation. And then I want to know my world really, really, really well, so that I know what things can possibly happen to them, and then just watch the two interact, right? And so years ago, I wrote biographies for each of the characters and kind of figured out where they were all coming from, figured out what had happened to them to put them where they're at. And so now when I write them, I know them really well and know what they're going to do. And I hope I hope that's reflected in their dialogue. I think honestly, I could probably step up as a writer and be a little bit better in my dialogue, and so for that reason, it's probably not a super different between the different characters. But I think at least between the first and the second book, I hope that I've improved on that because I've been trying to. So just thought I'd say that.
I have one
Yeah.
last brief thought as well.
I see a difference. I was just gonna say. And you're between
Just to sort of
Thanks, Jeff.
wrap that up. Whether you've got an acting background or not, one of the real joys of writing is inhabiting other people and not just getting them to do things that you would never do, but getting them to say the things that you would never say. It's cathartic. It's fun. It's like, ha ha, I took the bad guy and I really stuck it to him. Screw you, dude. It's a lot of fun, and it's one of the joys of writing, which can sometimes be really hard to come by. And so I feel like dialogue, rather than just getting you from point A to B, should be you having fun with people that you're getting to know.
Yeah. And also, I'm sorry, I've talked a lot this time. I apologize. Last thing that's been kind of burning a hole in the back of my brain. But someone at some point out there, you guys probably know, I don't, said that reading is an exercise in empathy, right? Because we're able to reach beyond our own human experience into something more. Sometimes that can drip into escapism, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I do think that if you want it to be, writing dialogue can also be an opportunity to empathize. As you try to figure out where different people come from, as you try to figure out why different people do the things that they do and speak the things that they speak. So I think there is an opportunity for that. I don't think that it's necessary for every writer to take that opportunity. Everybody gets to the same destination by different roads. So, yeah.
No, I think that's a really great kind of wrapping up point with what you and Cameron were saying. Well, this has been an excellent discussion about dialogue, a dialogue about dialogue, if you will. And I hope that after listening/watching this, our dear audience will possibly think about what kind of things are unique to them and their dialogue. Anyway, we are the Writer's Block, and until next time, everyone.
Good night.